Let's bring in Peter Morici, economist and professor of business at the University of Maryland. Peter, good to see you this morning. Happy New Year.
Nice to be with you.
All right, so this recovery in the housing market is somewhat uneven. What are we seeing?
Well, we're seeing the China syndrome. As Barack Obama was giving away the economy, those manufacturing jobs to China in the interior of the country, wages have been stagnant or declining, even though on the two coasts they've been booming in technology and in banking and the media. And as a consequence, housing prices are depressed in those interior areas. Essentially, while Barack Obama was giving away the country to the Chinese, he was also handing the election to Donald Trump, because there's a very close correlation between the zip codes where housing prices have declined and where Trump won the election.
Okay, so President-elect Trump, Peter, is assembling a team of rivals with views that are in some instances stark contrasts to his. It's the cover of the Wall Street Journal this morning. Some of those including on trade. Could this present a headwind to him, implementing some of those campaign promises?
Well, yes, the campaign promises with regard to China and trade, as articulated by Peter Navarro, were in very simplistic terms and about a world that is now past. You know, we're no longer competing with the Chinese on T-shirts. Now they're going after our high-technology goods. There was an interesting article this morning in the Wall Street Journal about that did a hatchet job on Navarro, which is what I would expect from the Journal. But they need a much more sophisticated view of China. In order to win with China, we have to go after their investment policies, their technology policies, and frankly, we have to go after them geopolitically with regard to the South China Sea and Taiwan all together. Because if we push in one place, like the exchange rate, which he campaigned on, they'll push back in those other places. China is the menace of this decade. It is the principal economic and foreign policy problem that Trump must address, but simply slapping on a 45% tariff won't do it. He needs a more sophisticated approach, and I'm not seeing that from this cabinet.
Have you called him up, Peter? You've been chatting with the president?
Well, I've been writing about it. And I know for a fact that there are people in there that read me.
And Peter, there is so much optimism. We've been talking about it here all morning about the president-elect and his policies, specifically on the economy, that is leading to this stock market surge. The other big topic this morning, we're watching the Dow potentially hitting 20,000 today. Is there too much optimism, considering he has not even entered the White House yet?
I think the market is ahead of itself. I am very optimistic that if Donald Trump gets his program passed through Congress or makes the necessary executive orders, et cetera, that the economy will thrive. We are very optimistic about less regulation and so forth. But, you know, the question is, will he get it implemented? I'm fearful that his cabinet secretaries, for example, at Labor, you know, the Labor Secretary knows what affects fast food, so the minimum wage is not going above $9 an hour. But is he aware of all of the ways the Labor Department makes guys like me miserable running a small business, increases my costs, and impedes me from hiring people? I don't think so. I'm quite concerned that the cabinet secretaries, absent this overarching vision from the White House, a good systemic view about what needs to be done, they'll just run off on their hobby horses. You know, at energy, it'll be ethanol. At the labor, it'll be the minimum wage and so forth. How are we going to get all these cats herded?
And, Peter, when does it trickle down to the middle class? At some point, I look here and I see that if you owned a home that was worth over $500,000 in the U.S. over the last 15 years, you probably saw increases in the upwards of 100%. You look at those same medium household values at 100,000 to 150, and they only saw a 24% increase. At what point and how do we actually get some of these tax benefits? Because I'm a small business owner myself. How do we feed that into our middle class?
Well, we don't see it until we get the economy growing. And we don't get the economy growing until we get a complex of strategies in trade, taxes, and regulation that work. We've got to get the tax cut passed, but this isn't Reagan's era. Merely cutting taxes doesn't slice it. And deregulation is much tougher than it was for Reagan, because in those days, deregulation had the wind to its back. People thought it was a good idea. Today, a lot of people are suspicious of it. But tax cuts without deregulation and the two without a coherent trade policy towards China don't give us the growth. I haven't changed my forecast for 2017 from that if Clinton had won. In other words, I still see 2% growth next year until he gets these policies passed.
Speaking of China, many in the national defense arena feel that the national debt is actually a national security issue to the United States, but a lot of economists think that the deficit is just going to continue to grow with Trump's proposed tax cuts, infrastructure and defense spending. What do you make of this?
Well, with regard to China holding our debt, I don't see that as much of a problem because of the way money works. If China were to dump our debt, you know, the bonds, they would basically get dollars, which they would go out of circulation, so they wouldn't count anymore. At the same time, the Federal Reserve could print dollars to buy up the treasuries that it dumped, and international capital markets would be unchanged. There might be an initial panic, but after we responded, they'd be unchanged. With regard to the deficit, that's a real problem. My feeling is we have to pay for the infrastructure spending that we need. We do that in two ways: cutting elsewhere in the federal budget and reforming what we do with the Highway Trust Fund, for example. For example, we're spending the Highway Trust Fund on bicycle paths. I'm a cyclist. Cyclists ought to pay for that with a tax on the equipment that they buy. We got to get rid of Davis-Bacon. It increases the cost of building roads by about 20% minimum. My feeling is we could do it better.
Say that again, though. We have a national gas tax, and granted it hasn't gone up in more than 20 years, but we don't take that gas tax to fix the doggone roads.
Well, we take about 3/4 of it, or 2/3 of it.
But we're funding our road construction with the general revenue. So people who aren't driving that much, their income tax money is getting spent on fixing roads used by others.
Well, most all of us drive, but you are right that we should use tax revenues from gasoline and, you know, tires and things like that, because we're going to have electric cars to build our roads. I agree with you. I also believe that we have to finally get rid of Davis-Bacon. Why is it that when only 7% of the private labor force is unionized, we kowtow to unions at every possible turn inside of federal spending? I don't get it.
We'll leave our viewers with that question from Peter Morici. By the way, as we're in less than an hour from the Open, do we hit 20,000 today before the end of the year? Your thoughts?
Oh, I think we're going to hit it soon, before the end of the year.
Okay.
Gee, if I could make calls like that, I'd be in Florida retired.
You're looking at all the economics behind the rally. I figured you had an answer for us. All right, Peter Morici, thank you. Good to see you. Happy New Year. Coming